We moved onto our homestead in 2020, and the last few winters we feel like we've gotten by all right. But we knew we could be doing things better. This year we decided to tackle projects, streamline systems, and invest in the right supplies and resources to have a healthy and thriving farm in the cold winter months. We feel more ready heading into winter this year than we ever have before. So come tour our 5 acres and see what it looks like to produce and store away foods that will feed us through the winter.
For us, December through March is a time when we slow down and rest. We feel a strong desire to pull back after a long growing season. We're okay, at least for now, that we don't have any greenhouses or cold frames to tend to. It's a time to keep things simple and basic, but also to make sure everyone is thriving and productive on the farm. While our animals do a lot of hunkering down too during these colder months, they continue providing our family with year-round foods that we rely on, especially milk and eggs. And in addition, our basement and fridges are stocked up with all of our storage crops, our pantry shelves are lined with foods that we've grown and canned, and our freezers are filled with all of our homegrown or locally sourced meat, berries, and vegetables. Winter seemed to hit early this year. We've already had a couple snowfalls at the beginning of December, and temperatures have dropped well below 0 degrees Fahrenheit on a few occasions. But Jim's still been out there pretty much every day trying to finish our new fencing that's left over from our big water line project that we shared about in our last video, along with doing some other improvements to this space he's been working on. The cows are in a temporary electro-netting setup, but we need to get them out of there and into this permanent fencing that Jim's been working on. This area will keep them safe and warm from all that winter brings and give them access to the barn.
When we tore up this whole area to trench in new water lines and electrical, I pretty much had a blank slate to redesign how the fencing would go back in. But what we realized, aside from some small tweaks here and there, is that the original layout was actually pretty efficient and well thought through. So we're basically putting the fencing and gates back up in the same locations they were in before, just with some additions and improvements to this smaller paddock off our barn, particularly with overwintering our animals in mind. Alright, you want to grab that one and help me fill in some dirt in this hole. The first step was setting our fence posts in the ground. Our neighbors have an auger attachment for their skid steer, and they were super generous to come over one evening to help drill in all our post holes. I tried this initially with using an auger on the back of our tractor, which probably would have taken a couple days going that route, but the skid steer knocked it out in a couple hours. From my neighbor's suggestion, who have plenty of experience installing fence, I made sure to track down the creosote fence posts. I was able to find these at Farm and Fleet, Fleet Farm, or my local lumber yard. Our neighbor mentioned that they've tried treated wood posts from other farm stores and had them start rotting after a few years, where the creosote ones come with a 25-year warranty. I will mention you should call ahead and see how many posts your local store has versus what you need. I had to do some driving around to find all the posts I was looking for, and the bottom of the barrel ones get pretty wonky. I used the 5.5-inch round posts and set them about 51 inches high and at 8 feet apart. To set them in a nice straight line, I just set the 2 corner posts first and then tied a string line between them to line up the rest of the posts with. Then you just level them out as you fill the hole back in and make sure to tamp in the soil around the posts for every foot or 2 that you backfill. Turning your shovel around and using the handle for tamping worked great. Once all the posts were set, I started out first on the fence that would become our compost stalls. I say fence, but this was really more of a wall. Here I set the posts 4 feet apart because I'm going to add some compost stalls off the back here that I could drive my tractor into and scoop up and turn over compost piles, so I needed it extra beefy. I started with a row of treated 2x4s along the bottom and then added 5 more rows of treated 2x10s on top of that. This solid wall design should not only be substantial enough for collecting our manure and compost, but can double as a windbreak for our animals on chilly winter days. Do I see the level? Oh, it's right here, right in front of me. Right in front of me. Got a wall, guys!
Yeah!
I made this section of this fencing that returns to the barn the same solid 2x10 design, also as a windbreak on the back side of the barn, and left a space for a 4-foot gate out the back. While it would have been nice to finish off the compost stalls completely now, I knew I needed to shelf it and keep going on the rest of the fencing to get this paddock tight and move our animals in ASAP. If you saw our last video, you know how sad of shape this fencing was in before we ripped it all out. Fence posts were rotted out, our gates would just fall over when you opened them, and the fencing was pushed down so much that our calf could just hop right over it, which made calf sharing a big challenge. For replacing the rest of the fencing, we wanted something that was much more functional, but also had a nice aesthetic to it. It certainly needed to keep in our cows and livestock guardian dog, but I also wanted it to double as a space we could let our chickens roam in and keep them contained when we don't want them free-ranging all over our yard. So it needed to be a pretty tight fence. Where I ended up landing was combining cattle panel with a traditional 4-board design. The first step was to tack in the cattle panel to the fence posts with standard 1.5-inch fence staples. Now I didn't go with standard cattle panel here, but I went with the little bit beefier panel with more horizontal bars, especially at the bottom. This would be helpful for keeping chickens from just slipping right through. Once the panel was up, I then started to install the boards, which basically sandwiched the panel between the posts and the boards. I did not go with treated boards here, but was super happy to find 16-foot rough sawn white oak boards at my local lumber yard. And they were actually much more affordable than I thought they'd be. White oak is a really tough hardwood that's naturally resistant to rot, and it's beautiful. Farms have been using it for fencing for generations, and it holds up really well. Plus, we really like the natural option and try to avoid using treated lumber when we can. The boards were 6 inches wide, so I just started screwing them in at the top and spaced each row 6 inches apart. Most of the boards were a few inches longer than 16 feet, so I still needed to cut most of them to size. I also staggered the full-length boards for each row, which helps provide extra rigidity to the overall fence. I needed to get a little fancy with trimming out around our green jug waterer, but besides that, it was pretty straightforward putting the boards up, and I love how they turned out. The last step was pounding fence staples into the backside to secure the panel to the boards. Just make sure the staples are short enough to not poke through the front. Overall, this fence is as solid as can be, and being my first go at building farm fencing, I'm super happy with it. The only thing left was installing gates. We had 2 4-foot gates and a 12-footer. I wanted to get the kind with the wire mesh bottom. 1, with the hope it keeps our chickens in, and 2, if we ever were to add sheep or goats into our mix down the road, I felt this would be the best bet for keeping them contained too. The gates come with the hinge pins, so I started with installing the bottom one first. I used a boring spade bit to drill the holes, then used a large closed-end wrench to screw in the hinges. One trick I picked up over the years is to install the top hinge pin upside down. This way the gate is locked in with no risk of an animal knocking it off the hinges. The last step was installing the chain so it can latch. With the 12-foot gate, one thing my neighbor suggested to me was to look into the 2-way gate latches that most farm stores carry. I ended up picking one up, and I'm so glad I did. What I really like about it is that it allows you to open and close the gate quickly, and it always securely latches. Which, when you're moving animals between paddocks, sometimes you need to act quickly, so this is perfect. I didn't get the 2-way latch for the smaller gates since they came with a nice chain latch already, but I definitely might look into upgrading in the future. We still had a few things to wrap up with the fencing before the cows could be moved in, but a cold spell hit for a few days along with some snow which shut down our outside project for now. Looks like the cows will need to get by in their temporary setup a bit longer.
I go out and milk Thimble, our Jersey milk cow, every morning. Even on these near 0-degree days with snow on the ground, we typically milk outside. On nights this cold, we normally give her access to our barn stall when they're in their normal fencing setup, and even then, she'll usually meet me outside to be milked in the morning. We sort of use Thimble's milk production as a barometer to see if our cows are getting enough hay or not. If her production stays around the standard 1.5 to 2 gallons that we'd expect to get during the winter months, we know that they're probably getting enough food. If it's less than that, we know we probably need to increase what we're giving them.
Down right there.
At this point, they've pretty much nibbled down all of the pasture that they have access to and moved to a strictly hay diet. We feel so fortunate to have a good source of hay from neighbors and an arrangement where they come and drop off a new bale every couple of weeks when we need it. While we really like the convenience of small square bales, you get so much more bang for your buck if you use the large round bales. We just stand one up on its flat end in our barn, and then we'll unroll a few flakes at a time and bring it out to our cows in a garden cart. It's been on Jim's list to build a movable hay feeder on skids that we can just load the round bales right into, but with all of our other projects this year, this one didn't make the cut. When it comes to hay, we try to look for something with a good blend of alfalfa, clover, and grasses. A second or third cutting of hay is usually your best bet because it will have more alfalfa and clover, which are good sources of protein. Since we don't supplement with any grains or other protein, getting a high quality hay for the winter months is important. We've also noticed that Thimble's body condition is looking better heading into the winter than it has in years past, which we're attributing both to getting plenty to eat along with having the right minerals. We've been using Redmond Agriculture's 10 Fine mineral that we give them a few scoops of every day in a weighted rubber feed bowl, but recently we switched to their Selenium 90, which is basically their standard 10 Fine fortified with extra selenium, which our area is depleted in. This summer, we also started giving them a few scoops of Redmond Agriculture's conditioner as well, which is supposed to help them maintain weight, and we really feel like it's made a difference to help her look healthy and be ready for winter.
One of the most important parts of keeping animals in the winter is having a reliable and freeze-proof water source. On this particular morning where it was less than 10 degrees, water can freeze fast. So going out and checking everyone's water is especially important on these frigid days. Since this is just our temp setup and we're separating our calf Hazel from Thimble at nighttime, I'm splitting the one water heater we have between our two stock tanks. You could see the one froze over pretty good, while the one with the heater is plenty thawed. Our jug waterer, which our cows will have access to once the fencing is finished, is our best friend on the farm, really all year, but especially in the winter. The issue with the troughs is filling them, which requires a hose or running buckets out to them. Our jug fills automatically, and it has a heating element inside that keeps the water unfrozen and flowing. Even on this cold morning, there's only a tiny bit of ice forming in the drinking bowl. And during our coldest days in past winters where it's reached -20 or 30 below, sure, I'll have to chip out some ice that forms at the top, but I've never seen it totally freeze over to where the cows couldn't have access to water. In the event the jug ever did stop working for some reason, we're really glad to have installed a new hydrant this year that's close by these winter paddocks along with a power outlet. This will make it much easier to fill water troughs and run heaters to them as a backup. Inside our barn is our chicken coop. One of the first projects I tackled on our homestead was designing and building my own heated chicken waterer base. That was 4 years ago, and this thing has worked every winter since. You can see there's a little ice starting to form around the trough, but I just chipped that out quick and the water inside is still unfrozen and flowing. The basic concept of it is that it's a large concrete block with a floor tile on top of it. And inside I ran a heat tape with a built-in thermostat to turn it on when the temps go below freezing. The heat tape provides enough heat to keep the water on top unfrozen. My favorite part about it is that all the parts can be found at your local hardware store and easily replaced when something fails, instead of needing to toss out an entire heated waterer or heated base like you would with the ones you buy at the store.
While pushing pause on the outside work to wait out this cold stretch, we wanted to do some organizing and take inventory of our food stored away that we hadn't been able to get back to yet. The biggest priority on the list was packing our potatoes and sweet potatoes that have been curing back into bins and storing them away for the winter. We waited a bit longer than we would have liked to tackle this, but better late than never. These potatoes and sweet potatoes have been on tables curing for approaching 2 months now. It doesn't really hurt the potatoes to be out like this. The biggest thing is exposure to light. When we store them in the bins go on the shelf that we cover with bed sheets to minimize the light as much as possible. This helps them to store the longest. We pack the larger potatoes on the bottom and the smaller ones on top. The larger ones will store better, so we try to eat all of the smaller ones first. The other important thing with storing this much food is checking on it regularly. I'm down here bringing something up pretty much every day, so while I'm down there, I like to do a quick check of all of the things. We've had a few of our smaller butternut squash go bad and have had to give them to the chickens, but by checking on things regularly, we can remove any problems before it gets too bad and could contaminate any other food around it. We've never had issues with our potatoes or sweet potatoes going bad. Keeping them dry and curing them on the tables really helps them to thicken their skin and repair any blemishes. However, what happens with potatoes is that over time they'll dehydrate and get soft. This is why we like to eat the smaller ones first, and we also save our Elba potatoes, which are known for their ability to store well, as the last potatoes that we eat. we've found that the albas will still be firm a month or two after the other potatoes have gotten soft. Also, now that we have slowed down on the farm end, this would be a great time to preserve any of these storage crops by canning or dehydrating them to make them last well beyond even the next couple of months. We've also been considering investing in a freeze dryer for doing this and would love to hear your experiences or recommendations if you have a freeze dryer.
One of the things we're most looking forward to after this project wraps up and we hunker down for the winter is getting caught up on the many things we fall behind on during the growing season, especially reading. And one of the things I'm most excited to read through more are our Backwoods Home magazines. Backwoods Home is a super practical, how-to oriented magazine that covers a huge range of homesteading topics. What we love about it is that it's not flashy or filled with a crazy amount of ads. Literally every article is something that interests us, and we come away from each issue with so much knowledge and inspiration. Honestly, I find monthly magazines to be a bit overwhelming to keep up with, but these quarterly editions from Backwoods Home feel like the perfect sweet spot, and they're always timely with the seasons. And while we're getting too late with shipping on a lot of items, gifting someone a subscription is the perfect last-minute stocking stuffer. We'll include a link below and you can get 50% off your order. The temperatures finally came back up to normal fall-like ranges, and I was so glad to be able to jump back on the outside projects. First up, and really the last thing before we were ready to get our animals back into their permanent fencing, was fencing off our orchard and Three Sisters garden area. Every winter I pound in a row of T-posts to section this area off, otherwise our cows could do a lot of damage in there, especially on our fruit trees. So first I come through and pound in the T-posts. Then I install those yellow insulators spaced for 2 strands of wire fencing to be run. With the 2 strands of wire, I've rarely had cows or Stella, our livestock guardian dog, get through it. Since our electro netting would definitely not survive a snow load, the T-posts are a great temporary option for the winter. In past years, our fencer that charged the electric fencing here was all the way on the other side of our property, and I also had to run T-posts hundreds of feet away to connect the wire to that. When we trenched in the new water lines and electrical, I also ran electric out to this spot and moved our fencer out here to make it much more convenient. It was so nice eliminating running that wire across our property, which I think we've all tripped on a time or two. Oh man, what a relief. The fencing was finally done and we could move our cows back into their permanent winter home. It honestly felt so good taking down that electro netting and seeing them frolic around and graze whatever pasture was left there for them. There were just a couple outside projects to wrap up to be fully ready for winter. The solid walls on the compost stalls on the back side of our fencing are a nice wind block, but we realized it would also be nice to have some overhead protection back there from the elements too. I had some extra metal roofing from our previous chicken tractor projects, so I thought I could throw together a small lean-to roof off the back side of our barn. I used treated 2x4s for this and then screwed on the 2 sections of metal roof. Then I added 2 treated 2x6s as ledger boards onto our barn where I planned to hang the lean-to from. I did use 2 heavy-duty hinges to mount the roof section up on top. Our county is crazy about adding more roofing sections even on farms, so I thought this could pass as a temporary structure if it has the ability to be dropped down if needed. We hoisted the roof up there with the bucket of our tractor and fastened it up on top. Then I cut some angled 2x6s to the right size as support legs and fastened that into the bottom ledger board. I didn't have any sort of firm designs with this, but I'm really happy with how it all came together. The last project to wrap up was finishing off those compost stalls. I used the same treated 2x4s and 2x10s from the fence sections and screwed those in. Last screw. Pretty much exclusively for this project, I fastened everything together with GRK brand screws. There are a few features that make these screws ideal for fencing. One is their large washer-like head. You see fence boards pop off of fence posts all the time, but the head on these holds things super secure for the long haul. The other thing is that they have this reverse thread technology that actually draws tight the two items you're screwing together for a super secure hold. I love these things. I like to keep the small paddock we separate Thimble into every night clean, so I go out and scoop up the cow pies in that area every day to stay on top of it. It's super convenient having these compost stalls right off of this area, and nice that the manure piles are out of sight now too. Literally the last thing to check off our list to be all ready for winter was tracking down some straw. I searched quite a bit for organic straw and finally found a source that was about a half hour away. We like a non-sprayed option because we use it as a mulch in our gardening, like when we cover up our garlic. But also, all the manure and bedding makes its way into the compost heap, which also makes its way back into our garden beds for growing food. Both wheat and oats, which make up most straws, can be heavily sprayed with chemicals. Up until this year, we've had a pretty minimal approach with bedding for our animals. This was mainly budget driven, and we would pick up a few straw bales to get us by and would make sure our animals had fresh bedding during the really cold stretches. Our finances are less tight now, and we definitely see the value in having plenty of straw on hand through the winter to keep everyone dry and warm. One of the things that's nice about regularly adding layers of straw in the chicken coop and doing the deep litter method is that it can actually act as a source of heat for your chickens during the cold winter months. As those layers build up, they become their own compost piles, which generate heat. Since most of it builds up under their roosts, this provides an extra bit of warmth for them where they sleep at night. Plus, the fresh mulch helps keep the moisture level down in the coop, which can prevent frostbite. The straw bales were out in the direction of where I pick up our organic chicken feed, so I also stocked up on enough bags to get us through most of the winter. It's a pretty standard mix of corn, soy, wheat, and oats that we get from a local farmer who grows and mixes it all. My dad recently commented that our chickens are looking healthier than ever, and I mostly credit that to giving them black soldier fly larvae. Every morning I start out by giving them a few handfuls that I think is the highlight of their day. It's an excellent source of protein which really helps with their feather growth and egg production, plus it offers them a ton of calcium which also helps with the eggs. Normally, there's a few hens looking pretty scraggly this time of year, but literally the whole flock is looking full, fluffy, and beautiful right now. Keeping hay around in wintertime is also a great snack for chickens when there aren't any fresh greens around for them to forage. The smaller, cured pasture grasses and plants that fall off the bale are a great addition to their diet. You'll find them spending a lot of time around the hay bale all winter long.
And so these are the simple rhythms that get us through those colder months. The improvements we implemented outside this year have really helped to make things more streamlined and efficient to keep chores minimal. Even something as simple as having a gate that opens the right way to easily pull a cart of hay through can make a world of difference. And I think our animals will be happier than ever with some much needed improvements and additions to their winter home. And ultimately, the more simple and streamlined we can make things outside means more time for us to hunker down and cozy up inside. Some hot tea, a good magazine, and cozying up in front of the aga sounds like the perfect date night.